Today is Tuesday, September 2nd, and we're thrilled to have you on this week's edition of the Real Love Video Chat. So good to have you here. We're going to leap right into the questions that have been sent in ahead, and don't hesitate to send in questions while we're chatting, because I think we're probably going to have time to get to some live questions today. I didn't get an unusually large number of questions sent in, so we might have a chance to get to some live ones. Here's a woman who says, I'm finding it painful to watch my husband be manipulated and used by his ex-wife. It makes me angry to see him meet her needs and requests, and also to watch him allow her to use him. I don't know how to love and support him in these moments. Well, it'd be, notice you said, I'm finding it painful and it makes me angry. So if you're in pain and you're angry, that would pretty much rule you right out for loving and supporting him. So you're in pain and you're angry, so you're on the field of death right off, sweetie. You're ruined. And so if he's being manipulated, he's on the field of death, you're on the field of death, everybody's dead. His wife's manipulating him, she's on the field of death. Everybody's swinging their clubs and fists and knives and maces and swords at each other. Who's going to help? So it's understandable that when you see him being jerked around by his ex-wife, that it would bother you. I get this. I get why it would. But until somebody makes the decision that they're going to see this in a compassionate way and step completely off the field of death, that they're going to understand what's going on and be understanding, that they're going to see it clearly and help instead of reacting, instead of, oh, I'm so mad that, until somebody makes the decision that they're not going to do that, all they're going to do is add more gas to the fire, which is what you're doing. So you see him being manipulated, and even if you're doing it in his defense, even if you step in annoyed at her, you're only making it worse. Adding anger to an angry situation only detracts from the love that he needs. So you step in and you feel frustrated, and part of your frustration may be at her, but part of your frustration is also at him, that he doesn't do something to stand up to her when she's manipulating him. And what he hears is that you disapprove of him, and that comes across as that you don't love him. And then he feels already unloved by his ex-wife and manipulated and weak and stupid and foolish in her eyes. Then you step in and you disapprove of him, so now he feels weak and stupid and foolish in your eyes. So now here he's got the two most important and powerful women in his life both telling him he's weak and stupid and foolish. Well, this poor guy just doesn't stand a chance on the planet, does he? So you're asking, what can you do? Well, you can quit it, for one thing. Quit disapproving of him. Make a complete change in your head. And the first step is accept the fact that you're wrong, that you are completely wrong to be disapproving of him. Second, make a complete change in your head, and by faith accept that he's really doing the best that he can. That he feels overwhelmed, that he's drowning. And then third, if somebody's drowning, rather than go out with a speedboat as fast as you can, and with a baseball bat hit them in the head and then try to drag them into the speedboat, which is kind of what you're doing, you might, before you do something too drastic, you might ask him how you can help. Or you might just go out and sit next to him. You might just go out where he's drowning and say, hey, how are you doing? And he'll tell you what's going on. So when he's all frustrated with how his wife's behaving in any particular situation, you might just sit down next to him on the couch or sit next to him after he's had a difficult conversation on the phone and just hold his hand and say, that sounded difficult, without making any judgment of him. Or you might say, is there anything I can do to help? Or what would you like me to do in a situation like this, without adding to his difficulties? The other thing you might do is, before these situations happen, you might say to him, what's the thing that you'd like me most to do when she acts like that? What could I do most that would be a source of support and help to you when she comes along and does, you know the stuff she does, and you describe some of the stuff. It's often easier to map out potential sources of support and help and ask him what he'd like before the pressure comes. Ask people what they'd like while they're sane rather than ask them when they're feeling all pressured and crazy like. He needs your love is what he needs. And he may be able to tell you better when he's not feeling all nuts and pushed around by her. But being frustrated by him and being angry at him and angry at her, wow, terrible, just awful. And if you have any doubt about that, if he's not sitting right there next to you, have him watch the archive of this and ask him if he doesn't feel pressured. Here's somebody who says, excuse me, in our Real Love group, we're having a tough time getting past the check-in that you described in Real Love for Wise Men and Women. We start off with good intentions of letting people identify themselves, but by the time the third person speaks, they talk well past a sentence or two. See, in Real Love groups, those of you who aren't familiar with this, in Real Love for Wise Men and Women, we talk about how in Real Love groups, the idea of a group is that it gives people an opportunity to tell the truth about themselves, so that creates then in turn the opportunities for other people to then see, accept, and love them. And one way, it's actually not essential, but one way to facilitate this process is that at the beginning of a group, some groups do what's called a check-in, which is where people for a sentence or two, maybe 15 seconds, at most 30 seconds, at the beginning of the group, they'll say their name and then just, describe how they're feeling. So, I'm Greg, and I'm been feeling kind of afraid this week. It's been a difficult week for me. That's a check-in. That's it. You're done. But some people in a check-in say, this is Greg, and this week my mother-in-law came over, and my boss did this, and I ran out of dog food, so I went down to the store, and they just go on, and they just keep on going. The check-in is just supposed to be very brief. 1 sentence, 2 sentences, you're done. Anyway, this person keeps going. Of course, like I'm doing right now, so I'm simulating it going on and on. Then it takes longer for each person after that to check in. I understand that they want to be seen, and they can't wait because of emptiness and fear. And if it happens just once in a while, that'd probably be okay. But what if it happens every single week? Now we have a system that seems ineffective because no one really gets loved, and then the time's nearly over. Are we wasting valuable time, or should we let things evolve naturally? You can do, obviously, whatever you want to, but the idea of the check-in is just to allow people to just briefly describe how they feel, so that even the most frightened people, the people who would be least likely to speak, have an opportunity just to say their name and register that they're there. These are people who might, in some cases, never speak. And it kind of introduces a feeling to the room. So, George checks in and says, I'm feeling a little nervous. It's been a hard week. I'm feeling kind of afraid. Then it gives an opportunity for others in the group, later in the group, when you get to the kind of more substantive part of the group, to say to George, earlier you said you were feeling afraid or anxious. Would you like to talk about that? It gives them an opportunity to question him about that. So the question is, what do you do about people who go on and on in the check-in? Use the check-in for a check-in. Now, if somebody during the check-in says, this is Fred, and I've come here to the group tonight because I want to kill myself, be flexible. Occasionally you're going to want to modify the rules of the check-in, or the guidelines, I guess. But on the whole, if somebody goes past 2 or 3 sentences, then whoever's kind of moderating the group, there's no such thing as a boss, might just say, do you mind saving the rest of that for when we do for the remainder of the group? Or just what we do in our groups is, if it goes past 2 or 3 sentences, you just say 15 seconds. You just keep it real short. You just say 15 seconds. That's it. And then they're reminded that they've gone over their 15 seconds. Because otherwise, it steals away the time of the other people to do a brief check-in. Then people who have longer, more substantive work that they want to do have a chance to do that. Because check-in really is more just kind of chatty. So if you're going to do a check-in, do a check-in. And if you're going to do real work, then do real work. So don't waste time doing a lot of blah, blah, blah. And the same is true when somebody is doing talking during regular work, during a group. If there's somebody who is telling a story, and they're telling a story about how their mother-in-law came over, and then their mother-in-law did this, and then she went in the room, and then she did... You know how some people tell stories? They tell stories that go on and on and on with detail after detail, and then she did this, and then she went into the room, and then she picked up a can of this, and then she picked up a can of that, and we all know people who can tell stories like that, and they tell stories, and they talk endlessly, and there are no periods in their sentences, and they go on, and they can tell stories while they breathe in and out, and there are no spaces whatever, and it just goes on and on. And at some point, somebody needs to help them to summarize their story. And so, if there's no point to it after, 5 minutes, maybe even 3 or 4 minutes, you need to say, and so really, help us understand. So the point of your mother-in-law's behavior was that she was what? What was she doing? Help us understand, like, in 2 sentences. Because you're not cutting them off. Do you understand? You're actually listening better. Because if it just goes on and on and on, you're not hearing the meaning of what they're saying. So you say, and after all of that, so your mother-in-law then what she was saying was, by coming in your house and doing all that, she was telling you that she what? What was it you were hearing from her behavior? That she was angry? That she was disapproving of you? That she wasn't respecting your space? Was she going from room to room and not asking your permission to be in? What was the message that you were getting from your mother-in-law's behavior, or your wife, or your son, or your whatever? You want to get to because whoever is speaking, remember this is one of the rules of seeing. The third rule is, whoever is speaking about himself. And that's where you have to get. When somebody keeps saying, my sister, my sister, my sister, they're not talking about their sister. They're talking about the effect that their sister had on them. So what was it you were getting out of all your sister's behavior? And if you can't get to that, you're not really listening. So the goal isn't to listen longer. The goal is to listen better. And if we're not getting to that within just a few minutes, 4, 5 minutes, then we're listening poorly. And we need to help people do that. And that's not interrupting. That's called facilitating. It's called smart listening. And we just need to get better at doing it. Here's another question about real love groups. I'll give you an example. Not long ago, a woman spoke about a situation that's troubling her. Someone wise spoke to the troubled lady, and it seemed like it was helping. The crosstalk, that's from somebody else, that was happening seemed to be as though it matched what you say is appropriate in your book, seeing and accepting. So all was well until someone else jumped in, and I'm not kidding when I say this, said, you need to do this, and you need to do this, and do this, and do that, and so on. In other words, they were giving advice. They were fixing. My question is, how do we get back to the seeing, accepting, and loving part after a bomb like that gets dropped? We really aren't loving very well. One might think that we were a repair shop for as much fixing as we do. Am I wrong, or is that the opposite of real love? Occasionally, somebody's actually asking for recommendations about something to do, but most of the time people are not looking for recommendations about things to do. And so if you ever have a doubt when somebody's describing a situation about what is needed, ask them. So sometimes I'll do that. So somebody's describing a situation in their life, and somebody's telling them, well, do this, and do this, and do this. You don't need to turn to the person who is fixing them and address them. You don't need to do that. But you can say to the person that they just fixed, so are you feeling like you're getting sufficiently what you're looking for? Are you feeling sufficiently seen? Are you feeling sufficiently accepted in light of what you just said? Or do you need to spend, or do you need any more time just feeling accepted and loved? That's one approach. The other is when somebody is fixing them, saying you ought to do this and this and this and this. And this is the approach that I usually take. The asking them if they've got enough is one way to go if you have less experience. When somebody just got through fixing them, just pretend as though they had not spoken, as though the words had not just passed through the air at all. It just didn't happen. And so then you address the person as though they had just freshly spoken. And so you just start over. And so you say to them the kind of accepting and loving things you would say as though they had just spoken afresh. And so you say, well, that must be very difficult and painful for you. Because that's what they want. They want to know that you understand their pain, or that you understand how selfish it is. So that must be difficult and painful is one example. Or let's say that they had just had a difficult interaction with their wife. Then you might say, for example, so describe how your behavior was with your wife. As opposed to a fixer would say, well, you should have done this. So instead of sticking with what they should have done, you just ignore what the person said should have done. You say, so what did you do? Now, describe what part of your behavior was loving and what part was selfish. And then you express your complete understanding and acceptance of their selfish behavior. In fact, you go out of your way to show them how completely understandable their selfish behavior was. Then you show them how obvious it is that their selfish behavior has continued over a period of time to lead to the destruction that they've been experiencing over years. Then ask them, so if you could go back and do it differently, what would you do now? Then you might say, after you've been talking to them for a while, so what have you learned just by talking about it? Ask them what they've learned. So it kind of the what, why, what. Although you haven't really done it in a formal way, But you say, so what have you learned just by our talking about it? You might even go a step further, which is, it's kind of out of the what, why, what, but that's a how. So how are you feeling now as a result of our talking about it? Are you feeling less anxious? Are you feeling more prepared to have a conversation like this with your wife, husband, whoever it is in the future? Are you feeling accepted more by the people here as you talk about this particular experience or mistake or whatever? See, there are 100 different ways that you can do it. Notice I'm giving you 5 or 6 different ways to address somebody who's brought up a problem. It's not really so much the way, it's that you're accepting and loving of them while you're talking about it. And notice, I haven't offered a solution because I didn't describe a problem. I didn't even describe a specific problem. So how could I offer a solution? And yet I could offer 5 or 6 different ways to be loving and supportive. So the fixing really isn't so very important. If you tell somebody how to fix a problem, then you're going to have to tell them how to fix every single problem every time. Whereas if you are sufficiently loving toward them consistently and they feel sufficiently loved, then eventually they'll feel loved enough that they can solve their own problems and they can figure them out, which is infinitely more productive. Here's somebody who says, every time I watch the animated movie Cars with my son, I always cry when I see the main character, who is apparently a car, named an animated speaking car, which we can do only in cartoons, named Lightning McQueen, who's racing in the race called the Piston Cup by himself with no pit crew. Apparently he lost all his friends because he was a pig, not a like animal pig, but a emotionally pig, as in selfish. Before the final race, he found some insight into life because he gets lost in a small town on Route 66. As he's losing the race, he hears and then sees all his new friends working as his new pit crew. They're there to support him and help him win the race. And that grips my heart and I cry. Then at the end of the race, he stops before the finish line and turns around and goes back to help an older race car that was pushed off the track by another car. Of course, now you've ruined the movie for me because I haven't seen it yet. Here again I cry. I cry because I would be that car that would go back and help the other car. Maybe I'm affected because my wife has left me, and so naturally I identify with the car who was left behind. But I sit with the emotions and I look at them. I wish I could get to the point that I could get past not having the sad emotions. I see this as me being a victim. Maybe. Rarely are our feelings and our responses and our behaviors all or nothing. Rarely are they pure. There's usually mixed motivations in there. So, part of you as you watch this may feel a bit of the victim, from your wife having left you and wishing that you had not been left alone, wishing that you had been not left without a pit crew, so to speak. Hence part of your tears from victimhood, but also, in there somewhere, probably there's also, a genuine desire to help and love other people. So how do you figure that out? Well, time and experience, but not just time. That old time heals all wounds is clearly not true, because time only makes many wounds much worse. Just as forgiveness does not come over time. With time alone, many people become far more bitter. So, with time and experience, and as you consciously look at the choices that you make, you'll be able to discern, as you make choices and as you experience feelings, how much of your motivation is, how much of it is selfish, how much of it is selfless. And I see that in my own life, And my goal is just to, bit by bit, slightly edge up the proportion of selflessness in my motivation. I don't know whether I'll ever get to purely selfless motivation in this life all the time. Doubt it. But my goal is just to get to increasingly higher proportion selfless acts that occur more often, that last longer. That's all. So you be more honest about the selfish moments that you see, and as you simply see them, as you talk about them, as you feel loved while you share those moments with other people, bit by bit you will root them out and they will change. How could you ask any more of yourself than that? It's about as cool as it gets. So what you're doing right here, which is talking about it, sharing it with all the rest of us, is about as good as it gets. Whereas many people never tell the truth about it. I've had the experience lately of counseling with an unusually large number of people who are pathologically selfish. People who, in their relationships with their spouses, with their children, with the people around them, think only of themselves, entirely of themselves, who are so consumed with themselves that they can think only of how any given event or person or thing relates to how it will serve or hurt them. And when you talk to them about it, they immediately leap to excuses, rationalizations, lies, manipulations, whatever it takes to be able to continue that form of life. If you confront them very strongly and absolutely prove to them that they're being selfish, they'll even admit it for a second, but then they go right back to defending themselves and making excuses, and then eventually attacking you for having the unmitigated gall to dare to point out to their royal highnesses that they'd been selfish, or that there was the possibility that they were. And they just won't discuss the possibility of their being flawed, as you're doing here. So hence the meaning, as you're doing here, discussing being wrong, not as you're doing here being defensive. Hence the incredible importance of our telling the truth about ourselves, because the instant that I choose to tell you the truth about myself, that alone sets me on the path on the path toward being loving, because I set down all my weaponry. How can I be fighting you? How can I be manipulating you? How can I be attacking you? How can I be doing any of those things? In the instant that I tell you the truth about myself, I'm also choosing to set down all those other getting and protecting behaviors. It's really kind of the beginning of everything good when I tell the truth. So it's pretty important stuff. My boys, says a parent here, were very rowdy in church on Sunday. I mean, really bad. Which is why it's a good idea to take tranquilizers to church. I got home and sat them down and told them that church was not a playground, which I'm sure was a real revelation to them. And there was a time and place to play, and church was not the time or place. I told them that they must need some practice on how to be reverent, and that I must not have taught them. I can just hear this going down like a cream and sugar. So I'm having them sit there with their arms folded for a few minutes a day so they can learn what it is like. I told them if they choose to act like animals again this Sunday, then we will come home and have to sit on the couch with their arms folded for 2 hours so that they can get practice. How can I be more loving and still teach my boys that there are certain places that we need to act certain ways to show respect. Actually, the principle that you're teaching is pretty good. Depends on the age of your boys. For one thing, it's really practical to understand that kids are kids, and that they're not full-grown adults. Most adults take their kids to church, tell them to fold their arms, put their eyes straight ahead on whoever's up there speaking, and act just as though they were adults, which is often relatively unrealistic. So, I would suggest that if your kids are really rowdy in church, going straight from really rowdy to completely quiet with their arms folded in church is probably going to be somewhat unproductive. So, you might try some in-between things, like giving them some things to do in church, things to draw on, things to color, games to play. By that I mean, of course, quiet things. But even some little secret games. Now I'm just making this up as we go, so you're going to have to come up with some games of your own. But even little games to play of your own. For example, as a speaker is speaking, you might ask these rowdy little snotty kids. I say this with tongue-in-cheek, of course. But you might ask these kids, for example, during a particular speaker's address, to see if they can count how many words the speaker says that begin with the letter B. And whoever gets closest to the right number gets whatever reward you pick out. Let me tell you, if you make the reward sufficiently interesting, you're going to have every kid who's capable of literacy, of calculating the letters that start with the letter B, watching the speaker like a falcon. It improves reverence in church instantaneously. There are all kinds of little clever things you can do with these kids to get them to pay attention for, at least a few minutes, that work a whole lot better than beating them on the back of the head. And then, you encourage them for the times that they were quiet, rather than making it all about berating them. You might do things during church too, like passing them notes and talking to them. Be writing to them during church. Sure, that's not quite as completely quiet and stone cold, icily reverent maybe as you're looking for, but right now you've got rowdy kids, who resemble the James gang, and you want them to kind of tone it down a little bit. So I would suggest something that is maybe a step down from that, where the kids look at you as more of a fun mom than an undertaker who hates their guts. You're going to get a whole lot more cooperation from these kids if you participate in something fun than if you don't. You might ask them, for example, in a given talk from the speaker to count how many times the speaker says a word that rhymes with game, tongue, fun, whatever. But then you're going to have to be watching the talk the whole time. You can make being in church a heck of a lot more fun than you're making it, is what I'm suggesting, as opposed to you guys go to stinking church and fold your arms and behave like good boys. You know how fun that sounds to me? As a young boy, that pretty much sounds to me like going to hell. What kid would want to go to church under circumstances like that? So I suggest you come up with some highly creative ways to make church a more interesting experience. No joke. Here's somebody who says, thanks for having me on the show. It makes me feel like you're here with me. I could actually laugh about it with you and see that I'm often too uptight about things. Yesterday I caught myself being about to answer my wife's why question and stopped in my tracks. And that was the end of it. Boy, it doesn't get any easier. Oh, let me explain. This is the guy who we read a question last week where he said he had a big sign on his head that said, "Control me." Remember this guy? And I suggested that he was controlled by people because he allowed it. Everywhere he went, he pretty much, with his behavior, invited people to offer suggestions, and then he took them and he allowed people to control him. And so guess what? Everywhere he goes, people offer him more suggestions and control him. And I said all he had to do was not cooperate with being controlled, but in a loving way, not in a stubborn, hateful way. And one way that I suggested was the why question. Almost invariably, when people ask us why, it's not really a question. What they're really trying to do is control us. When somebody says, "Why are you doing that?" what it really is an introduction into a way for them to tell us the way they want us, the way that they want us to do that particular thing. And if we answer the why question, we're morons, because what we're doing is handing them the bullet that they're going to load in the gun and shoot us with. Because they're just dying for us to tell them why, because they're going to tell us why it's stupid. So I was suggesting he not answer questions like, "Why are you doing that?" So he was saying here that he was about to answer his wife's why question when he didn't. And he discovered that when he didn't, it was over. Whereas normally, when she would say, "Why are you doing that?" he would answer it, and then she would proceed to tell him why that wasn't a good enough reason. Then he would argue with her, then she'd argue with him, he'd argue with her, and it would go on and on. So he learned it's better just not to answer. Then he continues, "In my real love groups, I have to be clearer that I get it, that I get a particular principle, and that I'm not lost and need help with the theory, at least most of the time. I just need to be loved." Now that's brilliant. Now this also is the answer. This is an answer to a question that somebody asked earlier tonight when they said, "So what do you do when somebody asks, when somebody says something and somebody jumps in and tries to fix them?" Now, one solution is to ignore the fixer and simply just love them. Another solution is for the person who spoke to say, if they have the courage, but most people don't, which is why I answered it the way I did, is if the person who spoke, if they have the courage to say, "I wasn't really looking to get fixed. What I was looking for was just a little love and support." And then they wait until they get that from the group. If you're not looking for solutions, if you're not looking to get fixed, then you say it if that's what you're getting. And if somebody's intruding and saying, "I think you should do this and I think you should do that," and that's not what you're looking for, all you have to do ever is just raise your hand and say, I'm not really looking so much for what I should do. I'm really just looking for a little support. If you don't say that, and somebody's going on and on about what you should do, then you're the one with the problem. Because you don't ever have to listen to somebody go on and on just because they're talking. So speak up. Otherwise, you're inviting it to continue. So we have to learn to talk about what we need and want. Then he continues. He says, "My boss is a tough one, since every decision flows through him. However, I've made some progress by just going ahead," or, "This is great. This guy's really making some progress. This is Mr. Where's the sign on his head that says control me? Now listen to this." He says, "I've made some progress by just going ahead or following through on issues without waiting for his approval or input. I just have to be clear that I'm not a threat," which is a ridiculous thought to me because the man is a walking brain. So, like at work and around a lot of people, you want to be clear that you're not trying to, threaten them, you're not trying to intimidate them, you're not trying to take over the place, but Unless there's some clear policy to the contrary, like you have to get permission before you do this, otherwise, use your initiative. Gosh, you're being paid to do that, hopefully. Otherwise, you would just be a pen or a pencil working at a place. So use your initiative and have the guts to make a mistake. Otherwise, you will if all you ever do is go, may I do this and may I do that and is it okay if I... What you're doing is you're putting off the signals that you're willing to be controlled, which is what this man has been doing. He has been wearing a sign on his forehead that says, control me. And now what he's saying is, I'm going to exercise a little initiative. I'm going to tell people that I'm actually a functioning human being with a brain. And if I sometimes make a mistake, well, then I'll make a mistake. And I'll pay the price for making the mistake. Tough. That's kind of like what happens when we make mistakes as human beings. So this is perfect. I learned a saying in the military that I'm sure you've heard before. It's easier to ask forgiveness than to get permission. Make some. Mistakes are how we learn. So I'm thrilled for you. This is way funner. You're not saying up yours to the boss. You're just saying, yeah, I'll take my chances and I'll learn from them. So it's just exciting for you to hear this. Here's somebody who says, I sent an email today to my son's house asking about the weekend since I'll be watching the grandkids. Generally, the home email is read and answered by my daughter-in-law. A short time later, I received an answer from my son from his work email. She apparently sent him the email to answer. Usually, she isn't so blatant about not wanting to deal with me. I wish it still didn't bother me. Even though I know lots of other people love me, I still want things to be different than they are. Silly, I know. Yeah, you're right. Actually, that last little, those last three words really say it very well, and you just need to feel accepted and loved with those last three answers, or with those last three words. And with that next to the last sentence. Even though I know a lot of other people love me, I still want things to be different than they are. Silly, I know. You still have, the only reason this bothers you is that you still have a, by your own admission, silly need to have the approval, and read that, love, of your daughter-in-law. You would still like this one woman to like you. And, it's understandable. She's the mother of your grandkids. She's the wife of your son. You would like this person's approval. And you don't get to have it. You don't get to manipulate it. You don't get to seek it. You can, but anytime you try to hurry up or manipulate or get or seek or pull at or suck in or do anything to artificially get the approval or affection or love of any one person, you're going to be consistently disappointed, annoyed, irritated, frustrated, exhausted. So relax, because your frustration, get this part, this is really big. She feels it. And so here are the two big parts. First, feel accepted and loved right where you are. I really get it. We really want to feel loved all the time. We really do. I do. You do. And it's really annoying in the midst of a wanting to feel loved to have a extra big rock under your butt in your chair, kind of poking you, which is what she is. So I get it. Or to have a piece of sand in your chewing gum, which is what she is. So I get that. And I completely understand it, and the more you talk about that with people and feel accepted by them and loved by them, the less you'll have a need to feel loved by her. So that's the most important thing. That, right there. No recommendation from me. No need to fix it. Nothing. Just that. So just feel loved while you're being, like you just said, silly and controlling and kind of selfish, wanting her to be different for you. I've done it. I don't know. Maybe I'm not up to 1 million, but a lot of times. And then maybe consider a perspective, and that is that if you feel any frustration at not feeling loved by her, which you do, she feels it. She does feel it. Not she might feel it, but she does. And if she feels frustration from you, which she can only translate as that you don't love her, then her reaction will tend to be to not love you in response. So by your wanting, sounds crazy, but by your wanting her to love you, this is crazy, the more you want it, the less you'll get it. Nuts, huh? So the solution is to go get it from other people and want nothing from her. Absolutely nothing. And you'll end up happier, and so will she. What a hoot, huh? Just a scream. Here's somebody who says, in order to feel loved in group meetings or on, I got this right? Yeah. Or on real love calls, I found that it works best when I have something awful to share, or when I emphasize my getting and protecting behaviors. And there's an obvious reason for that. We feel most loved when we feel loved at our worst. That's all. Simple as that. If I love you when you're good, so what? Now you have to keep being good. If I love you when you're at your worst, when you're your baddest, well, man, now you're going to feel really loved, because now you know there's nothing you can do to lose it. So that's why you feel that way. But you continue. That brings with it a few problems. A, if I want to call just to stay filled up, sometimes I don't know what to say. B, I sometimes get worked up trying to come up with something bad or big to share, especially at meetings. Can't always come up with something terrible to say about yourself. That's hysterical. C, when I do come up with something bad or big, people might start giving advice or telling me that what I'm doing isn't working, and then I don't feel loved. That's pretty funny. It's like you're stuck no matter which way you go. I wish I could just call and say, I'm empty and afraid, love me. Or, love me because I need it, and then feel loved. So how do I do that? Well, you just did that. You just did it beautifully. And people who've been doing real love for very long do exactly that. They just call each other up, go, I just needed to connect. I just needed somebody to feel loved by. And that's all they say. They don't talk about an issue. They don't talk about what they did that day. They don't talk about something bad from their past. They just say, I just called up because I needed to feel loved. That's it. Now, so that's a real simple beginning. Now, as a wise man, what do you say? Well, it depends. You may sometimes just sit there and just say absolutely nothing. Just sit and listen. And wait and see if they're going to say anything more. Because if you say, I just called to get loved and I just sit and listen, what am I telling you? By my just sitting and listening, I'm making my time and energy, which are the most valuable things I have, available to you and nobody else. I'm telling you I care about you, that I love you, right? I don't have to say I love you. It's obvious, isn't it? All my time and energy are focused on you. Now, after, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds, I might say, now, you understand what I'm doing, right? If you're new at this, I may say, you understand that the reason I'm sitting here on the other end of the phone listening to you is because I'm focusing entirely on you, because I care about, and I'm going to make you fill that sentence in. And you'll say, me. Good. So you understand what I'm doing. Now, do you need me to do or say anything else? I'll ask you that, so that you have an opportunity to tell me if you need me to say or do anything more. I may ask you, is there anything like going on with you now that's frustrating or annoying? Or with some people who are new at this, I may say, now, if it helps you, while you're just sitting there saying nothing, it may help you to imagine that I'm holding your hand or looking at you or whatever. We may do a meditation, or that's pretty rare, but the point is that my focus is on you, and I'm not going to have to fix you or tell you what to do or ask you to dredge something up from your past. If you call and say, I just need to get loved, and I'll probably, my most common answer is, yeah, I know. I understand. I get that feeling. So you just stay here on the phone for as long as you need to, and I'm going to stay right here, and I'm going to listen to you for as long as you need me to. That's what I'm going to say. And we may do this for, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I've done it longer, with not a word passing between us. That's sometimes what real love looks like. Absolutely silent. It's a wonderful experience. So sometimes it's not the least bit clever, and yet we think we have to say all these brilliant things, and we really don't. Here's somebody who says, I was raised with the Midwest morals, which boil down to, it's rude to interrupt no matter what. And also, if anyone ever asks you for a favor and your answer is no, then by golly, you better have a good reason and be ready to dish it. In other words, to give the reason. So my question is not how to overcome the discomfort of speaking up. My question is how to handle the other person's indignance at being interrupted or being turned down for a favor. Oh, this is easy. You need to practice this with real love people. You need to bring up the question you just asked with me with a bunch of real love people and hear the answer over and over again. When I ask you as an adult why you anything, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? And you say, what's the answer? What's the answer that you're going to get? The answer from any adult is because you want to. You're doing anything that you're doing as an adult because it's your choice. And frankly, it is none of my business why you're doing it. Now, let's continue this reasoning. If I ask you then for you to do a favor for me, and you say no, then what's the answer to my asking you why not? The answer to the question is because you don't want to. And you owe me no explanation. Let's see, unless I own you. And since we don't have slavery anymore, I couldn't own you, so you don't owe me an explanation. And this, like you said, Midwest morals and pattern of behavior, all that really was an excuse for controlling people. And it was wrong. Just because it was common doesn't make it right. And it was something we were taught by our parents. And since our parents and everybody else did it, that did make it normal. But normal doesn't equal right. So, when somebody says to me, Greg, would you be willing to blank? I say, no. And every once in a while somebody will say to me, well, why? And I'll say, because I have something else to do. That is usually enough answer for 99% of people. I don't add that the something else to do might be breathing, because it's none of their business what the something else is. It's something else I've chosen to do. If they really push me, which has happened, almost never, then I'll say, had I wished to tell you, I would have done so when you first asked. But I won't tell them, because it's not their business. And you need to get over your reaction to their indignance by understanding that people would push you to do something if they ask you a favor and your answer is no, only if they're exceptionally selfish. So their reaction is a response to their selfishness and has nothing to do with you. It's not your problem. This last question I think we're going to probably not have time for. So you'll have to save that one for me. So I'm going to see if we have time for one more short one. Yeah, here's a short one. I saw in the archive video how to get my boyfriend to commit, and I agree that by convincing someone you don't really like, I agree that by convincing someone you don't really feel like, she agrees that it's wrong to get somebody to commit to marry when they don't really want to do that. That's what she's saying. She says, but I live with my boyfriend. We've been together for 1.5 years, and he says he wants to be with me forever. He always asks if I'll love him forever. But he doesn't want to get married or have any children, and he's not sure if he ever will, because he's been there and done that and got hurt. But I'm 36, and I feel some time pressure to have a child before I hit menopause. He's probably the best guy I've ever had in terms of the person he is. I'm afraid that if I leave him to find someone who wants to get married and have kids, I may get the marriage and a child, but maybe a husband that cheats or is not good to me, like this present boyfriend is good to me. So why would it be so bad for me to settle for and appreciate what I have now rather than go look for more? Tough question, huh? Bird in the hand versus two in the bush. You have to decide what's important to you. So you have to decide whether what you have now, whether the relationship you have with your boyfriend now, whether it is sufficiently good, and I suggest strongly that the two of you read Real Love and Marriage together, because many people who tell me that their relationships are wonderful are simply settling for an adequate supply of imitation love. Things are just going okay. You read that book together and decide whether you're really got an unconditionally loving relationship or whether it's just sufficient imitation love. You need to decide whether you're just settling or whether it's real love. Then you need to decide whether you've got enough in that relationship to make up for your desire to have a child. If you really, really decide that you want to have a child, then what are you doing with him? Because you can find real love with somebody else. And if you really want to have a child and an unconditionally loving relationship with somebody else, and the guy you're with will not have a child with you, you just defined a relationship that can't be had with this man. Then you leave, as opposed to staying with him and feeling like a hostage for the rest of your life because you're just settling for, well, it's okay, and you're not really getting what you want. So I suggest reading Real Love and Marriage first and then making your decision from there. You won't be sorry. So we'll meet again a week from today, Tuesday, September 9th. Send me your questions to greg@reallove.com, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And between then and now, we love you, and we'll see you then.